Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, Theresa May has started a round of diplomacy with her own backbenchers ahead of critical votes on the EU withdrawal bill. And another Brexit row is brewing after the government published an attack on the EU for attempting to exclude Britain from the Galileo satellite project. Gary Gibbon reports.
In Downing Street this afternoon, pro-Remain Tory MPs here to meet the Prime Minister. A dozen of them voting against the government could defeat Theresa May.
Well, I'll go into number 9 then, wherever we're going. I simply go where I'm told.
Some went in hoping they might just hear from Theresa May's own lips the outline of a new UK position that's close enough to their own to stand down their rebellion. Instead, one source at the meeting said they didn't really learn much new, though they were promised there would be a briefing paper soon from the government. It looks as though the critical votes will happen in just over 2 weeks' time. Some rebels said they were dreading renewed newspaper and verbal attacks, though they said last time round those rather bonded the group and made them more determined. Not long after her meeting with the pro-Remainers threatening to defeat the government, Mrs May had another unrelaxing chat with the pro-Brexiteers threatening the same thing. One prominent member of this group said it only takes 20 of us to defeat the deal this autumn.
Successful meeting, gentlemen.
But they sense the Prime Minister is sliding towards a softer Brexit than they would like or could tolerate. If Theresa May tries to head off a potential rebellion of Remain-inclined Tory MPs by going with something quite close to the customs union and something that looks quite a lot like the single market for goods, you can't live with that.
I'm always open-minded. I'll see what the government come back with, but for me that would not fulfil taking back control of our borders, our money and our trade policy going forward.
And that goes for a lot of your colleagues as well, you think?
A lot of at least a third of the party.
A third of the party?
Yes, obviously the
who don't want a settlement like that, because it looks at the moment as though that's where she's going.
I struggle to speak for colleagues, but I suspect that would be at least a third of the party.
If the EU handling of the Galileo satellite navigation project is any clue, Brussels might just say a flat no to Mrs May's emerging Brexit plans anyway. The EU is playing tough on Galileo, excluding the UK post-Brexit from military aspects of this project. The government today issued a document saying it strongly objected to being excluded from aspects of Galileo and that this represented an irreparable security risk. They also said it could reopen the whole issue of the Brexit bill. A senior EU official in Brussels said they weren't budging and there was no question of a refund. For good measure, they added, if the British position on Brexit was as widely reported, the UK might well have to think again. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
Jeremy Corbyn's past political views on a united Ireland have been quoted back to him as he prepared to make his first visit to Northern Ireland as Labour leader. Today he made clear he wasn't calling for a vote on Irish unity, but it could happen if a majority of people wanted it. What he'd actually gone to Belfast to do was to press for a return to the power-sharing government that collapsed 16 months ago.
This is the first time Jeremy Corbyn has set foot in Northern Ireland since becoming Labour leader. At Queen's University, he won rapturous applause just for showing up. And remember, Labour don't even stand for election here. He spoke about the need for devolution.
We must do all we can to make power sharing work again in Stormont. We need all sides to come together and make devolution work again.
His audience loved it. Do you like Jeremy Corbyn?
I do, yeah. I think it's a breath of fresh air in politics. He's quality, isn't he? Like, he's just really cool.
Do you think Labour should stand candidates here if they're so good?
I think Jeremy understands that the role of the Labour Party is to endorse the Good Friday Agreement and the people of Northern Ireland, and we can have our own parties that move forward and help us do that without necessarily having a British Labour Party stand in the north.
His relevance here is not that these pupils could one day vote for him, it's that he could one day be Prime Minister and could authorise a border poll on Irish unity. Today, he said he wasn't looking for one.
That would be a decision that could be made within the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. And if that is the wish, then clearly such a poll would happen. I'm not asking for it, I'm not advocating it.
Yet Mr Corbyn's historic links to Sinn Féin mean he's still not trusted by unionists, who say his agenda this week hasn't helped.
He's not meeting with anyone who identify as unionists. He's not meeting with any of the victims of terrorism, even though he was asked by my colleague Gregory Campbell quite a number of days ago. In fact, I think it was 2 weeks ago, he was sent a letter requesting a meeting, and that is not happening. I think that's very regrettable.
Mr Corbyn says the invitation arrived yesterday, but on the Loyalist Shankill Road, he still has convincing to do.
He hasn't got the best interest of the other people at heart, that's for sure. He's just a Republican CNC.
To be honest, I don't know who he is.
So if Jeremy Corbyn ever wants to play the role of honest broker here, he has more work to do. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Belfast.
Well, tomorrow, Mr Corbyn will visit Northern Ireland's border with the Republic, which is, of course, the focus of arguably the UK's most difficult post-Brexit problem. Will there have to be a customs frontier there between the UK and the European Union? Our political correspondent, Paul Brand, is here. Paul, the Irish borders issue is obviously a major one tonight, and it sounds as though there's been no progress in negotiations with the EU on that or other issues?
No, the UK and the EU have been negotiating all week behind closed doors, though it doesn't sound as if we missed much, Raggy, because tonight the EU says that progress on the Irish border seems elusive. It says it is now concerned for the June summit of EU leaders, and at that summit we've got to make some progress on the Irish border if negotiations are to stay on track. Aside from all of that, the EU's also been sort of bringing Britain back down to earth about its ambitions up in space. The Galileo satellite project, this is a giant sort of GPS sat-nav system that's supposed to improve security across Europe. The EU says that Britain is chasing a fantasy if it thinks it can still stay a part of that project once we leave the EU. The British government has hit back tonight saying that is an insult, that it wants £1 billion back if we're kicked out of the project. So sort of, you know, satellite or no satellite, I think that is a row you can spot from space pretty much.
But, OK, hardball from the EU, but it's not just the EU that the government's got problems with, it's also its own backbenchers as well.
Yeah, because negotiations are still in deadlock within the Conservative Party too, particularly over the EU withdrawal bill. Several Brexiteers becoming very frustrated. They want that bill to come back to the Commons. Remember, it was heavily amended by the Lords to sort of soften Brexit, and they're really anxious to chuck out a lot of those amendments and get back to what they view as pure Brexit. Particularly Andrea Jenkins, she resigned from the government today, telling me she wants to be able to fight for Brexit, and fight is all anyone seems to do right now. OK, Paul, thanks very much indeed.
Now, it's a row that's been rumbling for months now, in fact, for over a year. Britain, Brexit and Galileo. Galileo is a satellite navigation system, a European version of GPS. It's costing about €10 billion. Much of it's up and running already, and much of that is down to British companies. But the EU says a non-EU member can't have access to the encrypted part of the system or the sensitive contracts. The European Commission line is that this is just the rules. What did you expect if you leave? But rules can sometimes be altered when expediency demands, and there does appear to be some division within the EU on that hardball approach. Well, the British, meanwhile, are threatening to pull their technology out of Galileo and to build their own system. Before we look at whether that is credible, here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
Space, the final frontier, location for multiple cinematic cliches and the venue for the next war, we were recently warned. And now a rather more local dispute is playing out in the heavens.
3, 2, 1, top, et décollage VS12.
Britain is to be excluded from secure elements of the European Galileo satellite navigation system, prompting a warning that the UK could go it alone. And today, Britain, which has provided around a quarter of the scientific expertise, said that Theresa May's offer of a unilateral commitment to European security is now conditional on unrestricted access to Galileo.
The UK wants to continue participating in Galileo. This is in the mutual interests of the UK and EU. An end to close UK participation will be to the detriment of Europe's prosperity and security.
The row over the UK's involvement in Galileo goes to the heart of the Brexit negotiations. The European Commission, with the support of some, but not all member states, says the UK cannot hope to be fully involved in such a sensitive project after its decision to leave the EU. The UK says that Brussels should show more flexibility because it provides vital financial and logistical support for the project. And there, in a nutshell, are the Brexit battle lines. The UK wants to cut a special deal with the EU, whilst the European Commission is proving a stickler for the rules. Brussels has achieved a goal that has eluded Theresa May. It has united the two sides in the Brexit debate, with Remain supporters criticising the EU.
It's a very foolish decision by the European Commission at quite a low level, I understand at a sort of technical level, to try and cut the UK out of the Galileo network. And it is in the interests of both the UK and the other EU 27 countries that we continue to work together on security. The European negotiators have said they want to work on security. The European Parliament has called for a partnership on security. The other EU 27 countries have called for a partnership on security. But then cutting us out of the Galileo programme seems to go counter to that.
EU officials say the UK plan would turn Galileo from an EU programme into a joint UK-EU one, possibly handing us the ability to switch off the signal. But Britain is not being entirely shut out.
In my view, the 27 member states will discuss this issue and they will instruct the Commission to offer more flexibility on this particular issue, because security cooperation between the European Union and the United Kingdom is an absolutely essential issue.
So, some hope for Britain, which may still have a role in Europe's answer to America's GPS system.
It's a set of satellites in space with help from ground stations that tells you exactly where you are on the Earth at any particular time. You can use GPS, but you can't rely on it because it's under the control of the American military. That's fine, but if you're really going to use it for many, many applications that are highly sensitive, that are really important to Europe or to our own nation, you have to have a level of control of your own.
A tussle in space, which has even prompted talk of a new satellite system with Australia, may help define our new global role. But Britain's interest in remaining in Galileo shows that in space at least, the UK sees its destiny in Europe rather than in the Anglosphere.
Nick Watt there. Well, I'm joined now by Paul Everett, the Chief Executive of ADS, a trade organisation for companies in the UK aerospace, defence, security and space sectors, hence the ADS. Very good evening to you, Paul.
Hi.
Who needs who more here? If we wanted to go it alone, is that a credible threat for us to say, OK, we pick up our toys and we...
I mean, I think everybody recognises that it's a far better solution for us to remain part of the Galileo project. We, as a country, have invested hugely. As an industry, we have huge capability that is essential to the project. I mean, this is it. The issue here is what we in the UK do not want to do is lose the UK capability and capacity to create satellites and the systems that support them. And the EU's line effectively is part of the Brexit negotiations, which is to say, if you don't have a deal, all this goes. The challenge for the UK is a timing one, which is that at this very moment there are important contracts being
which
let.
we're not yet, and then
so
we're not
this is a consistent theme in other areas, but there isn't.
How much damage can we do to it? Let's suppose we say we're going to play hardball with you. We're not going to let you use Commonwealth bases or our dependencies in far-off places to put your bases. We're going to pull our proprietary stuff out as far as we can. How much of a threat can we make to them?
I mean, I think the real issue, it will take longer and it will cost them more. But it's I mean, it's a 10 billion euro project. It might take them a couple more years. It might cost them a couple more billion, but across
they'll still have it.
Across the EU 27, that's not so bad. But also remember that the people who create this technology are by and large European businesses. So why would they not supply? I mean, we like to say we do have a UK industry, but that's a part of an integrated European space industry, and it is more likely that those companies will go, look, as much as we love you, it's, that's where our main customer is.
Yeah, and so they'll go. But would some of them move to Europe, do you think? Do you think is that because
that's the day? I think why we're seeing Greg Clark and the Prime Minister being quite so forceful on this matter is that losing that capability would be a real damaging for UK industry and future prosperity. We are about to see an explosion, if that's the right phrase, in satellite communications. We've got lots and lots of businesses in Europe, in the US, who want to buy satellites of large,
We're one of the biggest satellite producers.
and we are the #1 producer of satellites in the world. So losing that capability would be a long-term damage.
But would us being kicked out of Galileo and not bothering to produce our own, would that be severely damaging then to the UK industry?
Well, again, I think our challenge is that obviously Europe is a major customer. The European Space Agency and those are our customers, and you are not going to have the capacity and capability both in the UK and in another part of Europe.
So now look, just your feeling, who is being the kind of more stupid here? Is it the Brits who voted for Brexit and then say, but we'd like everything to carry on? Or is it the Europeans who are sort of cutting off their nose to spite their face because they...
I think this is part of, unfortunately, the way negotiations work. We've seen this in a number of areas where, as I said earlier, the EU basically says, look, if there's no deal, this is what you lose. And we've seen it from Aviation Safety Agency, Chemicals Agency, a variety of different areas. And, the rules do state, if you become a third country, you can't have access to the secure part of this system. Now, we all believe that at the end of the negotiations, the UK will have it will be a third country, but we will have a very special status, and particularly from a defence and security perspective, it will all fall into place. The challenge is there are other issues on the Brexit table which are not making as much progress, which brings the timing issue much to a head,
a negotiating bargaining. Paul, thank you very much. It could be a country 2.9 instead of third. Well, Nick is back with me because, as we've been hearing, Galileo is just one row with the EU. The whole Brexit process is not really moving forward at the moment, and there was a relatively forthright briefing by a Commission official today. What was said, Nick?
Yes, so it seems that there's a bit of a war of words between the UK and the EU. A senior EU official said that the UK was living in a fantasy world in which nothing changes with Brexit and everything remains the same. Cited a number of areas, including Galileo. The UK has accused this EU official of using insulting language, but obviously the interesting thing is this comes just a month before that EU summit at the end of June where significant progress needs to be made. And I have to say there is some suspicion amongst Brexiteers that this sort of row between London and Brussels could provide very convenient cover for what they fear is going to be slow but almighty moves by Theresa May to forge a strong and enduring customs relationship with the EU that would last beyond the end of the transition. Important, Theresa May did say at a recent briefing with Conservative MPs that it would all be done and dusted well before the general election in 2022. And one Brexiteer I was in touch with said that the government are slitting their own throats.
Nick, thank you very much indeed.